Hello, good evening. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Hello. So today is the 11th of July, and it is almost 9:30 in the evening here in Germany, where I am at. And I am Laura Maria Calderone, and this is 14 Days to Change. And with us, we have Jessica Ann Veldstra, and she's a child protection worker from the USA, from Alaska. Hello, Jessica. Thank you for being here. So, as you know, Jessica, you are our 19th story in this series, but it's actually the second interview we have. It's the second time we speak because the first one was on the 27th of June, so exactly 14 days ago. And before we speak about what has changed since 2 weeks ago, and we just talk about what's happening right now in the US, but obviously in Alaska, I wanted to show you bits and pieces of the conversation we had 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to play that video. But before I do that, just so we have in our minds how much from a numbers perspective the situation has changed in Alaska and the US, I'm just going to really quickly say some of the numbers. So when we first spoke 2 weeks ago, Alaska had 854 cases, total cases, and 14 deaths. Now, Alaska, unfortunately, the numbers have increased. So Alaska now has 1,323 cases and 17 deaths. The US, so in like the whole country, unfortunately, there's been a lot of increase. So 2 weeks ago, the US had a little bit over 2.59 million cases, and now it has 3.31 million cases. And death-wise, back then, it was a little bit over 128,000 deaths, and now it's almost at 137,000 deaths. So let's have a look and see what happened, right? So I'm gonna share my screen. So you should be seeing my screen right now. Where are you? Here you go. So you should see yourself right now. I'm gonna press play. Why don't you tell us about yourself? Who are you and where are you?
Well, my name is Jessica Veldstra. I am 39 years old. I live in Kenai, Alaska. I am a child protection worker, specifically working in adoptions for the state of Alaska, Department of Health and Human Services. So anything I say today is just my opinion. It's not related to that, but that's what I do. And I live here with my family. We like to do like camping and outdoor festivals usually in the summer, but a lot of that's gotten canceled, of course, this year.
But well, as you well know, I've been to Alaska before, and you are very lucky to live there. The beauty that you guys have is extraordinary, and yeah, so it's very nice. And even if you don't have all these festivals this summer because of the pandemic, I am sure you're still enjoying the nature.
Yes, it's absolutely gorgeous here, and a lot of wide open spaces spread out, mountains, lakes, and so we get to enjoy all that while keeping safe distance from other people.
So you already, now that you told us a little bit about yourself, you already mentioned what you do, but maybe we could talk a little bit more about that, and especially if you could give us a hint how much and if it has changed. So what were you doing before the pandemic began, and how has that changed now? Did you have to reinvent yourself or not at all?
I worked, of course, in an office with about 25 other workers. We child protection. So for my piece, it's mostly paperwork and assisting families in the adoption process, writing court documents, that kind of thing, appearing in court, um, uh, appearing in adoption hearings. And so uh, since COVID hit, the state of Alaska had a preparation period because we didn't have any active cases for quite a period of time when we knew it was coming, and so we got all of our paperwork in a row, and like got all these uh, health mandates issued, and then eventually they sent us all home basically to telework. There was one or two people left in the office that can socially distance from each other because they're the only ones left. But I brought my work computer, my desktop home, and hooked it all up, and I was ready to go on March 31st is the first day that I started working from home. Though then all the court hearings were either canceled or they were only in telephonic. And then all the adoptions got canceled, unfortunately, or postponed for a while until they could figure out how to set that up. And then all my work began to be with either on Zoom, Skype, telephonic. So that completely changed. I hadn't really used Zoom before. I hadn't really used Skype before. We had used it a little bit this year, just on one or two meetings. So I wasn't familiar with anything, and now we use it all the time. And it's a totally I mean, like, most of my work is similar or the same, but the way I do it is just different. And I'm still at home now. Many of my coworkers have returned to work, but due to the fact that I cover so many areas, I cover like all the way to King Salmon and Dillingham, Cordova, Kodiak, all these huge areas. Most of my work is remote anyway, and so they felt like at this point I can remain at home for longer than the people that are doing face-to-face visits. For those people who are doing face-to-face visits, we shut down, the state shut down anything that wasn't basically an emergency. So the calls that were like more of a risk for child abuse, or like it was like kind of secondhand or something like that, those were not investigated. Usually that we do an assessment on those, seek out services, but the risk was too high for spreading COVID. So they decided to only go to those homes or do those assessments with those really like high needs, like sexual assault or bruising or just out of control behavior, current drug use that we knew that was happening, that kind of thing. So we really lessened those calls, and it it concerns me because we know that kids weren't getting seen by doctors, nurses, schools, all of that, and they were at home with possibly people who are abusing or neglecting them, and nobody would know. And so I'm concerned about what's going to come out after everything kind of opens up further, because we know that domestic abuse rates may be rising, child abuse rates may be rising, they become more severe because those eyes on, and the meals and the teachers and all those things that kids get from school isn't happening right now.
Yeah, that was one of the, obviously the pandemic has highlighted many problems that most countries have, but it also has ensured that, just like you said, some problems that society and the government and organizations have a system into dealing with, or in normal times. Because of the pandemic, it has been very difficult. And I remember a few months ago, that was what you just said was one of the biggest concerns. So child abuse that you, for instance, as a teacher, wouldn't have the opportunity to take notice in class and wonder about, and then call social service and be able to help, or the woman that is in a domestic, in an abusive relationship, that when she goes and does, I don't know, the shopping or something, able to give a message, right?
Mhm.
And because of all these different lockdowns and quarantines, it has been more difficult. And indeed, the numbers have risen in different parts of the world. I know in South America, even it has happened with obviously towards women. And it's just one more thing that has to be taken care of and thought of now. But the reality of how bad it's going to be, just like you said, we will see once this pandemic is over or close to over. It's but you just mentioned different changes now that the state has ensured that they
Mhm.
take place and that you have experienced. What is your opinion? How has that been handled compared to other states, maybe, or just in general for it being the first? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume it has been a first, not necessarily pandemic-wise or health emergency-wise, but just
Mhm.
a first that the state of Alaska has to do such changes in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, I feel like, first of all, Alaska kind of was later in receiving their first case. Um, and so I think we've received our first case around the 15th, 16th of March, that was tested positive. And we had seen kind of what was coming. And so we had a lot of time to prepare. Like I said, the state told us, get all of our paperwork ready, get ready to leave. And then once they implemented that, and then it was also in the middle of spring break. So then the schools just didn't restart. And so the kids stayed home. And then one of the first mandates that was actually a mandate rather than a recommendation, from the governor, was that all restaurants and bars were closed except for takeout. And so it was interesting for Alaska because Alaskans are seen as very independent, very they're not into government control. They're very like free spirited. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Less communal focused, but how for that, and that's kind of more the urban culture. However, there is a village culture as well. Alaska's pretty diverse in the way that in a lot of these Alaska Native villages, it wasn't actually that long ago in their history that a huge pandemic hit them with um, the flu and tuberculosis, and they actually lost a huge percentage of their population. So, and these are just people's grandparents or great grandparents, and so there's some uh, estimates it's like 50 to 60% of their population, and 90% of some villages. And so they're very sensitive because of that historical trauma to pandemics. And so it's kind of it's a diverse reaction. And so the governor listened well, I feel like, to Dr. Zink, who is our our medical chief, and they went together. They closed down everything. They closed down everything pretty quickly compared to the rest of the states. But it was a mandate, but it wasn't like police enforced. I hear in other states they had like people writing tickets, arresting people, that kind of thing. It was a mandate, but they said, we are educating people. We're not going to enforce it by law, like by arresting people. So what our focus is going to be is, if we see somebody not doing this, what they're supposed to, like a restaurant open for dine-in or something, we're going to go in there and we're going to educate and ask them to comply. We're not going to arrest people, which I feel like was a positive, especially with what occurred later, of course, with arresting people in our country right now. But but they did shut it down. The curve really flattened very well, and then in late April, we were seeing days where we had no positive counts. Um, and they were worried because of the fact that Alaska is remote. We don't have a lot of ventilators. We don't have a lot of health. There's health medical centers in like hubs in like Anchorage or Fairbanks or Kenai, but a lot of the rural places don't have that medical. There's villages of like 200 people with they don't even have a health clinic, and so it was really concerning that if this pandemic gets out there, what we're gonna have to fly people in. What are we gonna do? Do we have enough ventilators? Do we have enough beds? And so they had started preparing, and the main goal was to get enough beds, get enough ventilators, have enough PPE, all of that stuff to make sure we had it prepared. And then they started lifting the main mandates one at a time. And we saw, one of the things that they lifted first was for medical attention, like non-emergency medical things, because that was shut down as well. So that was the first thing that they lifted, and then they waited for about a week or two, and then they lifted the next thing. And so right now it's technically completely open except for travel for the state. Each municipality, each village can make their own rules. So that's another thing that's complicated, but yeah.
But no, it's very, very interesting because it shows, from the beginning when you were starting to explain, you said, yes, technically Alaskans are known to be very independent, we do as we want, depending on what we want, as we please, basically. But then you also have the other part of the other side of the coin that is more about, okay, a village mentality, we help each other. So in a way, that was, let's say, the first card that was dealt that helped with this pandemic for Alaska. The second card, as you mentioned, was the knowledge and, unfortunately, obviously, the trauma of a pandemic that has affected quite directly a lot of people, because you mentioned it was grandparents and great-grandparents. So it's not so far in history that it doesn't feel real enough or important enough. And I guess the third thing, which is interesting because usually you see it as a con, but I'm seeing it a little bit as a pro, that your healthcare system is not the greatest, basically. It is, I mean, we have seen that many countries in the world have had certain parts that are lacking in the healthcare system. But in your case, it's small, there's not enough, and how do we get to the people? So even this thing that you would think it's really bad, it actually worked in Alaska's favor, because then it was the consciousness, the understanding was immediate. And also what you said, the education factor, right? Explain, make people understand why certain things shouldn't be done. And then if they make that mistake once, they won't do it again. And I am guessing and hoping and assuming that in the long run, because as we know, this pandemic is not something that will finish tomorrow or after tomorrow. It's going to take a while, because by definition, a pandemic lasts until there's nowhere any cases, right? In the long run, all these things, and especially this education factor, means that the Alaskan government and the citizens don't have a headache. They won't have a headache if, for instance, you have an outbreak, in order to try to enforce and be like, okay, I know it's very pretty outside and you're barbecuing and you're fishing, but you gotta stay and then fight. But you will do it on your own, right? By your own, yeah. It's, so you're lucky, basically.
We are lucky here. Our numbers have been low. There's people who are still kind of in denial. Like they say, oh, it's a hoax, it's not serious, and then but because we're such a small, really by numbers community, somebody else will be like, no, I got it, I have it. Like, it's not a hoax. Yeah.
I can tell you
Yeah.
that another good thing, because even here in Europe, I mean, we being outside, we watch the news, we see the news, so we see what is happening in the US. So we see that there are still people, just like you said, that think it's a hoax, think that it's just like the flu, thinks that it's an exaggeration. And at the same time, it's a little bit, it's frustrating, but it's also a little bit sad, because why would it be a hoax that the whole world is in, just to,
Hmm.
make a joke or something on one country, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. If it
Oh,
was one country, we may say it was a hoax, but it's the whole world. It's not a hoax.
exactly. It's the whole world, and the whole world is affected, and directly or indirectly, right? And even here in Germany, even here in Italy, which, as you well know, and as we have unfortunately seen, it was, after China, the place worst hit, the first place that was really badly hit back at the end of February. And although most of Italy lived that tragedy, that experience, and knew it by, every single day, watching the briefing, knowing the numbers, asking the questions, seeing and hearing all the tragic things that kept on happening. Now, when we're entering July, you do have people that say, ah, it was nothing, it is over. And there's a lack of care, a lack of, it's as if there's a little bit of a memory loss. And
Hmm.
we see it, I even see it here in Germany. The sun is shining, summer starting, and people are being less careful, the social distancing is less of a thing. uh, there's more gatherings, and we, as you know, Germany has been one of the best countries, but there are outbreaks. We're having outbreaks,
Hmm.
right? But yeah, it's uh, it's just the start of our conversation, and it's already extremely interesting. So thank you again for taking the time. So to continue, so we don't stay too much on this, tell me what is, so obviously you said you were able to, Alaska was able to flatten the curve quite fast, and you even had
Hmm.
just you had days where you had 0 cases and so on. So I'm assuming when I ask you what is it that people are talking about, so what is on the news, what's the topic that is concerning Alaska right now, always regarding the pandemic, I'm assuming Alaska's concern is more on what is happening in the rest of the country, or is something specifically happening in Alaska that is in your thoughts and in your conversations right now?
Well, right now, the curve did flatten, but then now we are seeing like the second wave, because we are opening up. They say that we have enough beds and PPE and everything for right now, and so they are saying it's okay. They're recommending face masks and all of that, but I think also in all of our minds is also the Black Lives Matter movement, which has also come up in our nation in the last month, and so that is complicates things, because of people are getting out and protesting. A lot of them are wearing masks. They're trying. It's a lot of it's outside as well, which helps. But you've got a large gathering of people, and the hard part is you're weighing risks, and there's risk. It's not a zero sum game. It's not like if you leave your house you're going to get COVID. If you stay in your house you're not going to get COVID. That's your two options. So you have to weigh your risk of, okay, what's my risk? Can I engage in less risky behaviors, wear a mask, try to stay within my social group and protest, or do I stay at home because I feel like my risk is too high. There's a lot of people who consider their risk, people of color who consider their risk of being assaulted by the police in certain areas higher than their risk of dying of COVID. So they are balancing those risk factors, and so that's a hard it's a hard thing to have in the middle of a pandemic, as but it's also I feel like really vital to and address these concerns. It's been happening for hundreds of years, and we've got to address it, and the work isn't finished, and it's a scary time for everyone, and I think that those concerns came up probably a little bit more because of the fact that we're all inside, we're all watching the news, we all are feeling stressed and concerned, and so those anxieties come up more, but for everyone, and I think that's why people are more involved and invested now, but it, even though it's not a great time, it is the time that we need change too. So those things are all complicated.
And so these are the things that these are the topics in the conversations in your circle of friends, in your family, in the news in Alaska, and so on.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
What about specifically concerning the pandemic? So you already mentioned, okay, the second wave is coming, but from what has been set up to now, there's enough protective gear. There's the Alaska is in an okay status to face the second wave, correct?
Right. That's what Dr. Zink is, the experts are saying right now, is that we have enough. We're still asked to keep our bubble small, track who we've been in contact with, try to keep it enough that we're only in contact with enough people that we could easily say who we've been in contact with for the last 14 days, so that if somebody does get it, we could easily track that. Wear masks when social distancing isn't real possible, like in grocery stores or that kind of thing. We've been asked to wear a mask if we're in the office, in communal areas, and then stay 6 feet apart from people as much as possible. No large gatherings, especially indoors. All of those things we've been asked to do, but there's no mandates for them. If somebody decides not to do that, that's up to them. And each community is a little bit different, though, too. Each city is different in Alaska. There are places, villages that are still not allowing travel in or out, except for emergency, which makes sense for them. I mean, there's small communities without a lot of healthcare, and so it makes sense for them just to kind of shut that down right now. And then there's communities that are more conservative in their risk taking. There's masks are just everywhere. Everybody wears masks. That if you go into a business, it's kind of required. In our community, I would say some days I see about 50% people wearing masks in the grocery store. Some day it's 70%. Some days it's 20%. It really depends. I think and so what we're seeing right now at this time, because our rates are going up, we recently had a day where I think there was 30 or 40 new cases, which is high for us. I mean, it sounds low for everybody else, but it's high for us. People are shutting things down again. Businesses are shutting down again.
Just to interrupt you 1 second, just to give context, because yes, you just had 30 cases in one day is a lot. And that is because currently your total amount of cases, confirmed cases, is around 800.
Yes.
So
it's probably about 900 now because of the daily rates have been going up. But yeah, it's 800 or 900 total cases. The state of Alaska has about 700,000 people, so we're very low population compared to landmass. We've got a lot of room to social distance. But yeah, so our cases are really low. But so for us, 30 or 40 cases in a day was very high, especially when we were seeing zero earlier. And so people are like, I have a couple businesses that I know locally that have decided to not allow dine-in anymore, or they're going back to just delivery or a drive-through. Some people were doing like a band, a local band here had done a performance where they were trying to social distance and there was very few people allowed and all of that. And they, you know, a couple of the bandmates there contracted COVID, tested positive, and so they're not doing it anymore. Like it's starting to shut down a little bit more. People get to make their own decisions. Businesses get to make what they want. Anchorage has mandated masks in most businesses out, you know, and you know, Kenai hasn't made any mandates like that. So each city gets to make their own decisions about that, and each person kind of gets to make their own decisions, which is interesting. It makes, you know, decision fatigue definitely a thing. Like it's hard to decide day to day what your risks you're gonna take.
Tell me, what are your hopes? So what is it that you're most concerned about? What is it that you think that is going to happen in the next few days, in the next few weeks, that you want to happen, you don't want to happen? And maybe if you could speak not only about Alaska, but also the United States.
I'm concerned that the rates will skyrocket at this point. They're increasing daily, and people will put themselves and their comfort ahead of the needs of the community as a whole. I hope that people continue to do the least risky behaviors that they can do, um, and I worry about what's happening to people's mental health, what's happening to children's safety, all those things. And so trying to balance all those risks together. But I worry about the rates continuing to rise here. I worry about, you know, people with complicated health issues, and I, you know, my hope is that they'll find that, you know, that I know that they're hard at work on a vaccine, and hard at work trying to figure out treatments. So I'm hoping that those can come sooner rather than later, and that we can stop this before the winter hits, because I know that winter time might be a real issue when it comes to this skyrocketing again. So my hope is that we can find vaccines and get those set up in place earlier than later. I worry that people will put their personal freedom above the good of the community. That's like my biggest worry.
Yes, and in the end, we have seen the pandemic. It's really about it loves people that are selfish, right? It loves people that are thinking of only themselves. It's the moment you start thinking about everybody else and then yourself, that is when the pandemic is losing. That's what they have seen. A good example of that is New Zealand.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Community.
They did a great job.
They have done a great job, but it shows also that it doesn't matter how great of a job you have done in the past, it needs to be a continuous thing. It needs to just keep on going, because they had for so many days 0 cases consecutively, and then they had a couple of imported cases, so people flying into New Zealand. And it's a fear, right? Because you just need one exception, one case to create an outbreak. So it needs to be continuous. And I think your hopes and concerns are felt by many. So let's see what happens. Talking about the future, if our last question, if you could give a message to a Jessica in 14 days, so your future self, the Jessica that will be here in 14 days, what would you tell her?
I would tell her probably to continue to make good risk assessments, continue to put the good of the community first, Continue to social distance, wear masks, and keep my bubble small until we have a vaccine or a treatment, and to keep trying to have good self-care, because I know this is detrimental to people's mental health as well. And so to try to balance all of those things and get out in the sunshine and use that to help balance my mental health as well. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Then I thank you very much, Jessica. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for your time. Now, my evening, Saturday evening ends, your Sunday day starts, and I will see you in 14 days.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Jessica from the future, which is Jessica in the past. How does it feel? You didn't see the video, so this is all new, let's say, right?
Yes.
Before we speak about the changes that have happened and what's happening right now in Alaska and the States, I just wanted to know, how does it feel to hear your past self giving you a message and also saying her concerns and her hopes, your concerns, your hopes?
Well, I think that it's a lot the same. I was glad that I took my advice and got out in the sunshine. I got a lot of sunshine in the last couple of weeks, and I was glad that I took my advice to keep my bubble small. Probably in the last 2 weeks, I've seen less people than I saw the previous 2 weeks, and kept that down to a minimum. And But yeah, it's interesting to to look back and to realize, how much has happened in the last 2 weeks in Alaska.
And on that note, tell me a little bit what has happened, because 2 weeks ago we spoke about, yes, you had a couple of days where the cases had increased substantially for Alaska, right? 30, 40 in one day.
Yeah.
But it was a relatively new event, right? This high increase in cases. But now
Yeah, yeah.
later, what happened?
So the 30 to 40 counts have increased to more consistently 50 per day. We're seeing a lot of 50s. And so because of that, what was about 800 plus cases for a total count for March, April, May, June. In just 2 weeks, we've almost doubled that, and now we're at uh, over 1,300. And so in just 2 weeks, we have, really skyrocketed our case counts.
But is there something specific that happened? Because when we left off, you were telling me you had some coworkers that had gone back to the office. You had some businesses that were opening up. And then in general, the state of Alaska was open, but it's not that, there wasn't all this traffic to get in, right?
Right.
Is there something else that happened, like some event that wasn't supposed to happen and went through? Or because as we know, everything we see today is the consequences of our actions 2 weeks ago, right? So,
Well, I think that, the state opened up. People have traveled. People are allowed to travel from town to town. They're working more in offices. It's summertime. People are getting out a lot more. People are not in my area. They're not required to wear a mask, and very many people think that it's not necessary and it's not as serious as it is, and so they don't take those precautions, and so there's a lot of probably unnecessary risk taking, and so the state has continued to say, try to keep your bubble small, try to wear a mask, all those things, but we're not going to mandate it. So
okay. And what's the situation with how with the borders, let's call them, of Alaska? Are you still open, or because of what's happening in the rest of America, you have closed?
We are still open. We are requiring testing before coming in
Like,
within 72 hours of coming. Mhm.
okay, and do you test afterwards also, or how does it work? Because
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it's 72 hours beforehand, and then they test when you come in as well. And so, but you have to like have a negative test 72 hours before getting on a plane to here. I think that most of the tourism right now isn't happening from outside. We don't have, of course, cruise ships are not happening. Big flights up here aren't happening. But Alaskans themselves are definitely getting out in droves and exploring the state. And some of that can be totally done safely. Getting in your motorhome and just taking a drive and being in your motorhome and having your stuff there and enjoying the scenery and enjoying the outdoors and fishing on a lake by yourself. Of course, that's perfectly fine to do. And so there's a lot of that going on too. One of my friends works at a grocery store, and she says that the amount of grocery, basically they call in and it's delivered to their car, grocery delivery, has skyrocketed in the last couple of weeks. She's been very busy, which I appreciate. I'm glad that people are taking advantage of that instead of being in the grocery stores. But I think it's because a lot of people are traveling down in their motor homes or in their cars, grabbing groceries delivery on the way, and maybe tent camping or that kind of thing in the great outdoors by themselves. Hopefully that's what they're doing. But I think that there's also a concern because dip netting, which is an Alaska thing, so in the Kenai, you have rivers, and it's a subsistence fishing opportunity for locals to fill their freezers for the winter with salmon. You have to be local, and it's for subsistence, for subsistence, basically to feed your family. That is the purpose of it. However, it's become almost like a sport thing in the last 10 years, and people from all over the United States come down, or not the United States, all over Alaska come down, and it can congregate in one place and are shoulder to shoulder. And then they also trash our beaches, which is another story. But we're really worried that they're all going to come down, be right next to each other, and spread the disease.
But so this is still happening. It's not
Yes,
canceled.
it's not closed down because it's supposed to be it's supposed to be something that could have been something that could be socially distanced. You could go down there, grab a couple fish, 25 fish, feed your family, that kind of thing. But it's in the last 10 years, it just has become just a party, and everybody's still doing it, which is not cool.
No, not. I mean, it is cool in general, but not now.
But not no.
No, not now. And
Mm.
how about, because now listening and watching the video, you also obviously you mentioned how although yes, Alaskans are known to be very independent and do as they please in a sense, there's also the village mentality, right? Like take care of your community. And this has also been brought because of the pandemic that the Alaskan natives have endured and not too far away, right? So
Mhm.
that trauma, those memories are still quite tangible that you don't forget. So you listen and you do, right? How are things right now with them? Has anything changed for the Alaskan natives or not in the last 2 years?
Um, so there is a lot of villages that are still not allowing travel into them, except for emergencies. And then there are also some bigger villages that have fisheries coming in. So what happens is these out of state people come up and work the canneries and work the fisheries. And there's been a lot of testing positive for them because a lot of them are young adults, college age students or that kind of thing. They're coming up to get a good paycheck. And so they have to be tested before they come in, and there's been a lot of positives for that. And so then they have to either quarantine or they're flown out. And so there's been a lot of testing, and that, which is good. It's supposed to be trying to keep those communities safe, but that is something that we are seeing a lot of positive tests from, as these college age kids coming up to work, and then they're asymptomatic, so they don't know that they have it. So when they test, they are positive, and then they can't work for a while, and they have to test clear and that kind of thing.
Okay. So, I mean, the situation in Alaska has changed a lot compared to what it was before, right? Number-wise, cases-wise, because that's thankfully you only have 3 more deaths, right, since the last time we spoke. But that's not the case in the rest of the United States, right? Alaska is far away, and as you were telling us last time, you're very lucky that you have this humongous state, beautiful state, and you are only almost 700,000 population-wise, right? So you've got space, you mentioned, to social distance and to really be careful, but that's not the case for other states. We have seen increases everywhere, especially like Arizona, Texas, Florida. And I have a couple of questions about that. I'd like to hear your view, right? Because one thing is what we say abroad when we look at what's happening in the United States, and another thing is when someone that is from the United States, but is in a state that overall has handled well the pandemic and is, continues to do so. Disney World or Disneyland, the one in Florida, they're opening today. They opened today after 4 months. And Florida is one of the states that has had a humongous increase of cases and of hospitalizations. And obviously now it's the death's turn, right? Because it's just the way it is. First you've got cases, and some of those cases are going to become hospitalized, and some of those are going to die, right? What do you think is the logic to open Disneyland, Disney World, the one in Florida?
I don't know. That it just floors me. Florida, of course, has a high population of older people who are more at risk. It's a retirement state. And it's interesting to me because I have seen, for some reason, a lot of people in the what we call the baby boomer generation take it less seriously than those of us who are millennials or Gen Z or Gen X. And so it's interesting to me that they're the ones who are making probably those calls to open up and put themselves at risk. We as their kids are saying, wear a mask, don't go out, we'll do the grocery shopping, all those things, and they're like, oh, we'll be fine. And I don't know where that mentality comes from. I know a lot of them were like, grew up in the 60s where it was kind of an anti-government type of mentality, and so maybe that's a little bit of where that comes from. When you see the protest of the civil rights and the Vietnam War and all those things, you kind of don't trust your government as much, and so maybe that's where that piece is coming from. But yeah, it worries me. With Arizona, Florida, those places where a lot of our older population, more at risk population, is at. My parents live in Arizona, and their numbers have skyrocketed, but like they didn't shut down like Alaska did. They were pretty open. It was amazing to me, like the stuff that like I see groups of parties without masks, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we would never do that with 25 people. I'm like, what? what is happening? That's not something that we'd have here. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. Each state has their different mentality. I think eh, that's the only thing that I can come up with is that, that anti-government mentality of the boomer generation has just continued on. And you can't tell me what to do.
So I don't do it because I mean, sure, Disney is the most magical place in the world, right? That's their slogan.
Hmm.
But magic won't work with the virus.
No.
Right? There's no pausing, ignoring it, or not believing in it, right?
Right.
That
It's,
just
it's astounding to me, and really, I feel like a more hard shutdown at the beginning would have prevented a lot of these things. And mask wearing prevents a lot, and you can have a lot of freedom if you wear a mask and are able to socially distance, keep 6 feet away from people. You can do a lot of things with that, but you have to do those things. You have to give yourself a little bit of protection to engage in those freedoms.
yeah,
So
yeah. This from what I've seen and what you have obviously seen, because I feel there are many things that we are on the same side, because you have different experiences, I have different experiences, but the way we're seeing the pandemic is very similar. And what I'm seeing is that the pandemic is not, it's not something for the lazy, it's not something for the spoiled,
right.
because it's not something that you just do for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and then you're like, okay, I did my part, let's forget about it, it's summer, right? You just got to keep on doing it until literally the whole world is pandemic free, virus free, right? And then
Right.
things can go to back to a normal or normal. And we just keep on seeing things in the United States that don't make sense. Like, I guess the communication there's a confusion in communication, right? One moment, like, you have the CDC that says something, and then you have someone from the government that says something else, then you have a governor that says something else. And it reminds me a little bit about what you were saying about the decision making fatigue, right? You just don't know, who do you listen to, what do you look at, do you look at your community or your city or your country? And that makes it worse, right? It's just
It makes it really difficult because we do have, I mean, the United States is such a unique place because we have each individual state that has their own autonomy to make decisions. You have the federal government that has a certain amount of power but doesn't have actual power over a lot of decisions. And then you have municipalities that also make their own decisions. So like in Anchorage, masks are mandated. In some of the little villages, there's no travel out. In Kenai, I don't know, there's like maybe like a handful of places that mandate masks, and other than that, you can walk in without a mask. And even like in Kenai, I just heard on the radio today that they're doing a big concert in August with a beer garden and music. And I'm like, are you kidding me? What are you thinking? It just is astounding. It's outside, but still, like, that is like a breeding ground. I'm like, this is not necessary. So it seems like, yeah, each place is making their own decisions, but um, it and at a certain point, I know that people think, well, I don't want the government to tell me what to do, but you know, if they do, then it takes away some of that decision fatigue. It is an emergency. We do have our freedoms in this country, and but some freedoms would not without responsibility. With great freedom comes great responsibility. We've been told that all of our lives, and so we have to take those responsibilities for others' care seriously. And one of the best things I've seen is a uh, uh, a pastor presented his uh, Easter message, and he talked about how important love is, and that a mask is a symbol of love, because I don't do this for me, I do it for you. And so in order for us to get through this, we have to be loving toward other people. We have to care about other people, and not be selfish and not be self-centered. And that's what most people are taught that, that you have to sacrifice a little bit. And I feel like that's important. And we've been told, people, during World War II, they, sacrificed so much. And World War I veterans sacrificed so much, and now we're being asked to sacrifice parties and putting a face covering over our face, and we can't do that. Come on, people, get it together.
Yeah, completely with you. Your message right here is perfection, because it's really that simple. And nobody's saying if you wear a mask, everything's fine and it's the solution. It's part of the solution. And why wouldn't you do everything that is possible in order to stop the spread, in order to ensure there's no more cases, that there's no more hospitalizations, and there's no more deaths, right? Because from cases, like we said, it's hospitalizations and then deaths. Right now, the United States in the last 24 hours had around 65, 70,000 new cases in one day, 24 hours. How are you to contact trace that? How are you to call every single person and say, okay, let's see who you were with and try to contain it if you have like 60,000 cases every day?
And even here, they're saying it's difficult recently to contact trace, and we only have 50. And so they're putting out saying, if you were in this bar or if you were in this shop, get tested. But they're saying even at 50, it's hard to contact trace. So I can't imagine, how do you even?
Yeah. And there's people that say, oh, but the United States is a big country. That is why. There's many big countries in the world, and you can even look at the European Union or Europe as a country if you'd like, and each country is a state, and then it is still doing better than the United States. Like from cases, from deaths, from daily cases and everything. And yes, this is not a comparison, exercise or anything, but we need to try to stop it, because it doesn't just affect the United States, like it affects the world, right? So because there are countries that will let you travel, because right now there's many countries that don't you're not welcome, basically, right? In many countries. But there will be countries that, because of their economy, they'll say, you know what, we'll just go with it, come United States. And if you're not taking care of things in your country, you will take the virus and make things worse for countries that don't have the money that you have, that don't have the healthcare system that you have. Regardless of how many problems you're having right now, there are countries that are worse off than you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we should have the money and the medical technology to deal with this, easily, if we could get the people under control. But to get the people to take responsibility for, their actions and make good choices.
I just have a couple more questions, because with you, it seems like we talk ad infinitum. While I was watching again this video of your first interview, and you were saying about some of the things that Alaska did to stop the spread, to flatten the curve. And one of the things was that they wanted to educate people, right? So instead of, if there was a bar that was open that shouldn't have been open, instead of giving a fine or arresting the owner or whatever, they, police or whoever would come and explain things and educate them. And it worked, right? And it is true, because as we see right now in the pandemic everywhere, not only in the United States, one of the things that is heartbreaking, because it causes more harm, is disinformation, misinformation, and ignorance, right? So not really understanding what a pandemic is, what a virus is, what are the usual outbreak control basics, right? So contact tracing, isolating, testing. So the things that were done for all the different epidemics and pandemics and any other things, why they're being done right now. And it just came to my mind, and I was wondering. I know that Alaska is a very unique state in all the states of the United States, but I'm wondering, has there been part of a state or a state that has asked help from Alaska just to like have that concept of education or copy or plagiarize you or something? Or you?
Right. Yeah. No, I don't. So that question was asked during a briefing because we were having the lowest numbers and per capita. And of course, we have a low population, but per capita, we've still been having very low numbers, all those things. And so they did ask if somebody was, contacting the governor or Dr. Zink to see if, for information. And they did say that, they collaborate with each other, but nobody had specifically asked what we did uh, at that time. I think that was probably a month ago or so. But I think that the governors do collaborate and try to figure out what the best options are. I know that Hawaii's rules are very similar to ours. We tend to have the same kind of issues. Hawaii, even though it's much smaller in landmass, it's still like not connected to the continental United States, and they have less hospitals, and so do we, and so we have a lot of the same issues. And so they did a very similar thing than us, and their numbers are very low as well. But I don't think that anybody's at that point had asked our medical chief or our governor what they did, and to copy that.
Well, I hope they do. I no, really, I hope they do, because it's I know it will not be easy for states with a bigger population density. Of course it is harder. Nobody's saying that you can just copy and paste, right? But
Mhm.
use as a blueprint and see, okay, we need to explain, we need to educate, we need to communicate, and we need to find the best way of doing that. So look at other countries, and if you don't want to look at other countries, or you also want to look at your country, then look at other states. And hey, look at Alaska, look at Hawaii, right? So I hope that happens. Before I ask you my last question, otherwise I'm going to take up your whole day. Is there anything else that you would like to say based on the changes that have happened, based on like what you said last time, or what is happening right now with Alaska or with the United States?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really unique time in history. We really need to be taking this seriously. Um, and yeah, I've been trying to, keep my stress level about it down, and realizing that I can only control myself and educate, hopefully be a good example to others. But yeah, understanding that this is a hard time for everybody in the world right now. And hopefully people start making good decisions in my country, um, and 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 make those sacrifices that are necessary.
Yeah. And with these words of yours, they're kind of an answer to the last question that I was going to ask you, but I'll ask it anyways in case you want to add a little bit more to it. So my last question was, whereas last time that we spoke, I had asked you if you could speak to a future Jessica, what message would you give her? My question now is, based on this experience that you've had with me and 14 days to change, just of the fact that we spoke 2 weeks ago, we speak today, and we see what has happened, right? What changes have brought in 14 days, and your experience with the pandemic and everything that's going on right now. My question was, I wanted to know if you could give a message, if you could speak to the person that is going to watch your story, right? Jessica's story of the pandemic in Alaska and the United States. What would you want them to hear? So regardless if they're American or if they come from a country that's better off right now than the States or worse off, if you could tell them something, if you could make them hear something, what would it be?
I think it's that regardless of what our governments say and regardless of what our local health officials say, um, we know we have the science and we know how to make change and we have the power to do so ourselves as individuals, and as families, as communities. We have that power. While it would be nice if governments would help, we can't necessarily, and rely on that. And so, um, to use that power of our knowledge that we've learned through this new pandemic to make those best decisions, to stop the spread. We can do it, regardless of what, our government says, or regardless of misinformation that's being spread online. We know, the best way to stop it is to keep, socially distanced from each other, wear a mask when that's not possible, keep our bubble extremely small, wash our hands, use good hygiene. We know that all those things are, kind of, undisputed. And so we can do that. Each individual can do that. And that is the loving, compassionate, caring thing to do for our community, our country, and our world.
Yeah, perfect. Jessica, it has been a pleasure again having you. And thank you so much for taking time in your Sunday, 2 Sundays that you gave me. And I really hope that things don't get worse in Alaska, so stay there. If you're gonna go fishing, that salmon or the 25 salmon for your family, do it, but social distance, don't party. And I hope that August festival concert gets canceled. Whoever is playing, I'm sorry, you can play next year. And yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. And I hope things get much better in the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica. 14 days to change, and bye-bye.